Yo, what's up, Sci-Fam? It's your boy Nickel here, and I want to now teach you about the 6 different formats that organisms use for asexual reproduction. So we're going to put all 6, if we can, on one page. We're going to define each of them, and I'll give you some examples along the way as well. Now, you might be thinking, like, why the heck, or how actually, do organisms use asexual reproduction? Because if they're not reproducing with a mate, that means they have to reproduce with their own body in some way. And so we're going to look at 6 formats in which this happens. The first is a process known as binary fission. Now, this is just a new vocabulary term for a process that we've already learned about, which is the process of mitosis. So this typically is going to happen with really simple cells that we call those prokaryotes. So binary fission is the process of mitosis in prokaryotes, meaning that they reproduce. So you might have like an E. coli or some type of prokaryotic cell here that then just splits in half, or at least it goes through mitosis. So it goes through the process of making a copy of itself. And then when it splits here at the end with cytokinesis, you end up with 2 organisms, and it copies itself, and so they have the exact same DNA. And so those can continue on copying themselves over and over and over again. So those prokaryotic cells are typically going to be the type that go through binary fission. The second type of asexual reproduction is known as fragmentation. This fragmentation is when pieces or parts of the organism, the animal or the cell or the plant, where pieces or parts of the organism can reproduce into a complete new organism. So basically, it can, if it gets separated from each other, or if it gets fragmented, meaning it cut up, it will both pieces will become a whole new organism. So let's take a look at an organism that does that. It's not the strawberry, that one's going to be coming up soon, but it's actually an animal known as the planaria, and this will be a good example when you do your Google Slides assignment. This planaria is a crazy creature. It's a flatworm, and if you were to cut off its head, it will actually grow a whole new organism out of the tail and out of the head. So if we look at this, some people cut the organism only halfway and ends up with 2 heads. It's a really famous scientific organism in science class where you can cut it and it will end up creating a new organism out of both halves of it being cut. You can see some diagrams of that down here. So both parts of it, its head and its tail, will regenerate to create a whole new organism. This is known as fragmentation. All right, back to our notes. If you wanted to, we could draw a little picture actually of this little flatworm. We cut it in half, and we end up with a 2-headed planaria. Pretty crazy that that works like that. I've got these eye spots here at the top. Okay, third type of asexual reproduction is known as budding. Not buddy, but budding. Okay, so when something is budding, it means that the organism, whether it's a plant or an animal or some other type of animal or some type of living thing, but that organism, that living thing, creates a branch, or it might be called a bud, which detaches to become a new organism. So an example of this is actually the sea star. A sea star would be a good example of finding this idea of budding, or a hydra plant as well. But actually a lot of these types of plants here can go through this same process. So if you look here at this back stem, this is one organism here, and you can see it's growing this kind of pod out here. And actually what happened is that this long strand here that goes back behind the pot, that was an old piece of this over here, and it fell off, and I just stuck it back into the dirt, and actually look, it's still living. This part obviously isn't, but this part looks nice and healthy, and it's still alive and living. And then this one started growing a new branch there. So you can imagine that eventually that branch might end up falling off, and planting itself. So that's what succulents do quite often, is that they'll actually be able to grow from one of their branches, a whole new organism if it were to detach. All right, number 4. This is known as vegetative. So it's going to have with vegetative, meaning like probably plants. It is a plant process. Vegetative propagation. And vegetative propagation is when new organisms grow from horizontal, meaning like running across the ground, horizontal plant structures that we typically called runners, because they're running along the ground. And so if we go back to my prior search, which was strawberry vegetative propagation, strawberries are a really great example of this because they have these runners that run along the ground. And as they go, you can see that the daughter plants there on the side are from the parent plant. And the parent plant sent the runner out to the right, and then new strawberry plants, wild strawberry plants, can grow from that original one. So that'd be an example of vegetative propagation. All right, our last 2. Number 5. This one is wild. Parthenogenesis is the process when a female gamete, so like the egg cell in a female animal, the female gamete becomes just a new organism without actually being fertilized by a sperm cell. So imagine that a female has an egg cell, and all of a sudden that egg cell just goes into becoming a new organism without the sperm cell ever arriving. And this actually happens with, Komodo dragons. So if you're looking for a example of this and you're trying to figure out an example of this for your research, just look for those Komodo dragons. They are a wicked species that have actually been shown to go through this parthenogenesis. And lastly, number 6, the final type of technology or strategy, I should say, that animals or living things, plants too, and single-celled organisms, that living things do to asexually reproduce would be to create spores. And these are one-celled or singular-celled reproductive units. And it's a one-celled reproductive unit which grows into a new organism. And it has the exact same DNA, because essentially it's going to make an exact copy of the organism, just like all of the other types of asexual reproduction does. So if you were to look at a fly amanita, these have spores here in the gills, and the spores in the gills fall and also drift into the wind to make a whole new organism, a whole new fly amanita here for this example. And these are mushrooms, so they have all these hyphae which go through the ground. It's like the root structures. It's actually more of the plant body. But anyway, go ahead and look into the world. Find some examples of some actual organisms. Now that you know all these formats, it'll be interesting to see what are some species that go through these 6 types of asexual reproduction. Adios.